Say, look at how the time goes.
3, 2, 1, and welcome everybody to this episode of the Coming Home podcast with John Allen. I am your humble host, John Allen. Humble but happy, and looking forward to this conversation I'm about to have with Miss Catherine Dumas and Miss Sita Lozoff. Hello, ladies.
Hello. Good morning.
Yeah, good. It's afternoon here and morning over there in the beautiful state of North Carolina. I lived there for a while. I was 4 years active duty in the U.S. Marines, and I finished up in Jacksonville at Camp Lejeune. And I lived outside of Jacksonville for, I don't know, about 18 months, maybe 2 years. And since then,
so you know what a beautiful state it is.
I have to tell you, when I later ended up in the Chicago suburbs and married my wife, my crazy little Norwegian wife, and I wanted to take her on a trip, a long road trip, just to show her what the United States was all about. And you know what my number one destination to show her was? North Carolina. So we took 77 down, and then I believe when we hit I-40, we took it west. And so that whole area in North Carolina and also Eastern Tennessee. So I'm quite familiar with North Carolina. I love it there, and I miss it. I miss it very much. But enough about my travels. I am so interested in the Human Kindness Foundation. And I know that there is a rather interesting story, what I thought was an interesting story about how the whole thing came about. So maybe, Sita, you can tell me, how did the Human Kindness Foundation start?
Well, I'd love to share that with you and your listeners.
Please.
In 1973, our brother-in-law, Pete, got a sentence of 12 to 40 in federal prison for smuggling marijuana. Now, that may seem like a steep sentence, but it was the second time. The first time he got probation, and the second time he was caught coming in front of the same judge who... They don't really like it when they give you probation and you do the same thing again.
Right.
So he got 12. He got 12 to 40, and Bo and I and our then 2-year-old son went up to Terre Haute, Indiana, and visited him. And it was the first time we had ever been connected to a prison or into a prison and all that. Yeah. And it was quite eye-opening. And on the ride home, I remember Bo saying, I might have some work to do inside prisons or with people in prison. I just feel some kind of a connection to them.
So he was just moved. So he was just moved and inspired to just jump right into that.
Well, I will tell you how that all happened.
Yeah,
he felt a connection, but that very same year is we read the book Be Here Now, which was written by the American spiritual teacher Ram Dass, and it was an extremely famous book in our country at that time. And Ram Dass was starting to put copies of Be Here Now into prison libraries all over the country. And he was starting to get letters back from people in prison.
I see.
And so this was the connection. When he came down, we at that time were so moved by Be Here Now that we invited him to come down and give a talk at Duke University. And
Now,
he
what was
did that.
Now, what was your connection to Duke University? Were you teaching there?
Nothing. It was just a place for him to give a talk, and Bo was that kind of a guy. He's going to go to the top place.
Now, what line of work was
to get this thing done?
What line of work was Bo in at the time?
That's a very good question. I don't believe I've ever been asked that. We did odd things. We grew little bedding plants, and we had a farm, and we did this and that. We boarded horses, but we basically lived on a farm and did what we could to stay on that farm, and I wouldn't call it a line of work. It was just a lifestyle.
Okay.
That we had more than a line of work. So as I said, we invited Ram Dass down to speak at Duke, where we had no connection. It was just a place, and he said yes. So he came down December of 1973, and at that time, Bo told him that we had just visited our brother-in-law, and he felt some kind of connection. And Ram Dass said, well, I'm starting to get letters from people in prison as a result of Be Here Nows in prisons all over the country. Will you take these letters? And that, my dear friend John, was the birth of the Prison Ashram Project.
Very interesting.
So both started writing letters and more letters and on and on and on. And he wrote a small book called Inside Out. And I would say I joined the project around mid 70s, when our little boy was old enough to go to school and that kind of thing. So I became part, even though I did have pen pals, but I mostly joined the project, I would say, in mid-December, and that's how the project began, and here we are.
There's a lot of interesting little snippets in that story about how things got started. What interested me was the way in which because I can imagine, just thinking through my own life and thinking of some of the friends that I have, they get this little idea, this little inspiration to do something, but they might be intimidated because the person they need to contact is important or semi-famous, and maybe they feel like that's out of reach. But you and Bo just made that contact. You took that step and you made that contact with Ram, and look what it led to. So you didn't.
That's a lovely way to put it. But you didn't know Bo. That was nothing. That was nothing for him to do. That was his nature and his energy. Adventurous. I actually read Be Here Now first, and I turned him on to the book. So that was more my thing, and that's the way we continued probably through our whole time together as part of Prison Ashram Project Human Kindness Foundation. Is that I was more comfortable just being in the background. And he had that energy that was kind of electric, and he just went for it.
So it went from an idea, just a thought that fell into his mind as you're in that process of visiting at the prison, and then this thought falls into his mind that he has work to do. Was it inspired by something concrete, or was it just one of those things that just happened where the inspiration just hits you full force and you don't really understand where it came from or why?
Well, we feel like inspiration does come from God. That it is, that's where how things get inspired, is that we are guided. We put ourselves out there and with a willingness to be guided. And I would say that he felt guided. He may not have had the words for it at that time, yes. But we certainly had the words for it later and continue to. We have guidance.
I do believe that that all inspiration is divinely inspired. Absolutely. And just like you said, I also believe that sometimes the vision isn't clear, but you just know. You have a rough idea, and you just have to get started. And if you keep on walking down the road, the vision will get clear, the fog will clear off, and all of a sudden you're going to see where you need to go and what you hopefully will end up doing. but that inspiration should always be acted on.
That's lovely, John. That's a lovely way to put it. And of course, one of the parts of the word inspiration is spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there it is. We're all kind of inspired in that way. And,
Let me ask you something, Catherine. What would you say to the person, as Sita said, and as I agree, I believe that inspiration it comes from the divine, it comes from God. But what do you say to the person who claims to not be spiritual? They say they're not religious. They say they don't believe in God. Where do they get their inspiration from?
Well, that is a great question for our organization, because as an interfaith organization, Bo used to sometimes say we're interfaith, not no faith.
I see.
In other words, he was interested mostly in people finding what does inspire them, regardless of how they define it, and very deeply interfaith. In other words, some people use the term interfaith to sort of mean a tolerance for other faiths. That's not at all how we see it. Starting with Bo's work and continuing, like Sita said, to our current work, it's interfaith to us means truly drawing from and deeply respecting all the great religions. And these days, that has kind of expanded to, we do have supporters who are atheists. We have one wonderful longtime volunteer who has been so tremendously valuable to us. I'm going to say his name because he deserves a shout out. His name is Mark Hutchinson, and he is an atheist. Hi, Mark. He's wonderful, and he's a very deeply ethical person, compassionate person. He cares about the world. He cares about other people. He does not express it in terms that we would think of as spiritual. Now, does that mean he's not spiritual? I don't think so, and I'd have to ask him for more detail on how he would answer that question. But I do know that he identifies as an atheist. And yet spends enormous amounts of time helping us out at this organization that is all about spirituality. So he's just one example, and there are others.
That's very interesting that you laid out the distinction that you don't tolerate, if I can put it in quotes, you don't tolerate religion. You're not religious. How do I say this? You're not religion tolerant. In other words, because to tolerate implies that you think there's something wrong with it, but okay, you'll accept it. Whereas when you say that you are accepting or you're open or you're interfaith, that puts a completely different shine on the entire foundation, which I think is very interesting. I want to say, when I was doing my research, that you have advisors or cooperation with both priests, rabbis, imams. Is that correct?
Absolutely. With Buddhist teachers, with every type of faith is represented to the best we can. Now, we have maybe deeper connections in some communities than we do in others. That's just our own limitation of who we are and who we know. But when we notice a weakness, we do try to reach out to that community. For example, a number of years ago, I started noticing that we really didn't know a lot about Islam. In the sense that the people who make up Human Kindness Foundation happen to come from a variety of traditions, but that did not include a Muslim. So we started making an effort to reach out. I've met with some of the local imams in the Durham area. I've reached out to some people at Duke University. Omid Safi is a wonderfully beautiful poet and teacher at Duke who is a Muslim. And we've used some of his writing. He gave us permission to use some of his writing in our newsletter. So in those ways, we actively reach out if we see a weakness. But absolutely, it's really how the whole foundation, the basis of the foundation. Bo wrote a book in 1985, and it's still our best known book. It's still the one we send out the most frequently. The title of the book is We're All Doing Time. We're all doing time. And we're about to print, Sita, remind me, is it the 22nd printing that's coming up?
It is 22nd.
And that will put us over the 500,000 mark of books, of that book that we've printed.
Wow,
and
fantastic.
The whole foundation of that, yeah, isn't that exciting? The foundation of that book is that Bo had the goal of looking at what every great tradition has in common. What is it that every great tradition agrees on? Let's focus on that.
And there is a lot to agree on, actually.
Absolutely.
I wish
There's
more
a lot.
people. I wish more people knew that. I think we'd have a lot less suffering, a lot less combativeness in the world if more people would realize that.
Right. So Bo wrote that book with that in mind, and also with what he had in mind was the audience for that book was people who are incarcerated. So combining all the great traditions and what Bo had learned, and he studied them deeply, what he had learned from the great traditions, what he had learned from other elders and teachers of his, and his experience writing to people who were in prisons and jails. By that time, he had been writing to them for quite a few years.
Wow.
And also visiting in and teaching inside prisons. So he had a rich understanding of prison life as well as a rich understanding of spiritual life, again, represented by all the traditions. So that book, although it was specifically written for people in prison, it has reached a lot more people than that. Most of the copies that we send out go out free to people who are in jails or prisons. But we also sell the book. We sell it as an ebook. It was written in 1985. People who weren't even born yet in 1985 are getting excited about this book. So it seems
That's just fantastic.
Yes, it's amazing, really.
I haven't had time to read it. I haven't had time to read it because I quite recently found out about your foundation and the work you do. But that is on my list of books to read. It's been highly recommended by a common friend that the three of us have. Shout out to Aaron Turner. Yeah.
Yes.
No, go ahead, please.
Well, we'll be happy to send you an ebook if you'd like it. We do have we have We're All Doing Time as an ebook. Just remind me later, and I'll send you a copy.
That would be great. Thank you. And I also want to make sure I get if you have a link. I don't know if it's available on Amazon or where, but if you can give me that, I'll post it out so my listeners can track down that book for themselves. Yeah.
That would be great. Yes, we sell it on our website. I would say your listeners in Norway might do better by getting it from Amazon. I hate to do that because, of course, we'd rather sell it directly.
Yeah.
But international shipping is a huge issue for us. So if you're not in the U.S., you might, I reluctantly recommend that you might get it from a more local source to you.
Okay. Sita, let me go back to 1973. Things are getting started. You've been to the prison in Indiana. How did the work of the Human Kindness Foundation spread from that one prison in Indiana to other? How? I guess there's two questions. How did it spread, and how far has it spread?
Well, at that time, the invitations that we received to respond came from Be Here Now and Ram Dass, the books that Ram Dass had put into these prisons. So it all began with Ram Dass's letters, people who were writing to him and Bo responding to them slowly. And then he wrote a book called Inside Out very soon. After that, based on his correspondence that he had. I'm not actually sure of the date of Inside Out, but it's such an organic project. It really started slowly and grew. I mean, it's 47 years now. So we started very, very slowly. Yeah. And right now, I don't know, you tell me, Catherine, how big a project are we at this point?
We currently have around 30,000 people on our mailing list who are incarcerated, and another maybe 4,000 who are not incarcerated.
That is a lot of people.
Yes, it is. And they're spread all over. Now, we're physically based in North Carolina, but within the U.S., that doesn't matter.
Right.
In other words, we're shipping the books anyway, and whether we're shipping them 10 miles down the road or all the way across the country is the same. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, it is harder for us to take care of the people who are not in the U.S. It's just a huge expense. We do have people from other countries on our mailing list, just not near the numbers. And we also have we have Spanish translations of 3 of our books.
Oh, okay.
So we are able to help people who do not speak English, at least in that one way. Bo's main book, We're All Doing Time, has been translated into several languages, but right now, as far as we know, there is only Spanish and English, which we publish, and a volume in Dutch.
Dutch as well, okay.
Yes, and that one is still in print. But the others, there was a French and an Italian and a Portuguese, and those, as far as I know, are not in print.
Okay. No, go ahead, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
So as Catherine said, we've sent out almost 500,000 of them. We have 30,000 people on our mailing list now. But through all these years, since 1985 or 6 or 7, when the book first came out, we have sent out that many. And I truly believe, John, that the way books are shared inside prisons, that more than 1 million people inside have read these books.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Just thinking about all the time they spend in there, of course, they're going to interact with one another. And if that book touches one person, I'm sure they're going to share it with another, and so on and so on. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
We get lots of interesting stories. Sorry, we've got some kind of feedback going on. Can you hear me okay?
Try turning your volume down. It sounds like a volume feedback. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is that better?
That's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay. So we get great stories that illustrate what you just said, that people find our book in all kinds of ways, and sometimes it's fun to hear. Like, for example, they'll say, "I found your book in the trash can," or my cellmate had your book and he was using it as a doorstop for 6 months, and I finally decided to pick it up and read it. Things like that are just kind of, it supports what Sita was saying, that if the book goes to one person, it may get read by who knows how many others. But one of my favorite stories like that is there was a man in a Florida prison who actually physically came to see us. After he got released, he came to see us, and he told us the story that he was, and I assume is, a Christian. And he believed at first that his Christianity was telling him that this book was of the devil. This was an interfaith book. It didn't fit what he had been taught to believe about his Christianity. So he had made it his mission in this prison in Florida to go around and throw away as many of those books as he could. He would take them out of the day room or the library or the chaplain's office or wherever he might find those books and throw them away. And he had been doing that for quite some time. And he tells us when he came to visit that finally one day he thought, well, since I've made this my mission, I guess I should read this book and see, kind of like know your enemy kind of thing. And so he read the book and he realized that it was not the enemy. And he completely changed course at that point and started promoting the book instead of throwing it in the trash.
Wow, now that's interesting.
Isn't that great?
That's fantastic. Well, that's a testimonial to the power of curiosity.
Yes. And open-mindedness.
I'm sorry?
And open-mindedness.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that his curiosity led to an opening of his mind, which led to a new influx of information, and it totally changed his thought process. Interesting.
And guidance.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Sita, you are, am I correct in saying you are the spiritual leader of the Human Kindness Foundation?
Yes, that's right.
Tell me what that entails. What is that function that you have then?
Well, basically, we have called this project a well-run mystical organization. And so I believe at this point that that it's really my work and my to remain guided and to make sure that it doesn't that we don't just become a well-run organization, sending out books, et cetera, that we stay with that mystical edge. And we do that through the books that Bo wrote, and through our newsletters as well. We send out 3 newsletters a year, and Catherine and I work together on putting out a newsletter, put a lot of energy into it. So I would say that it's my work and my love to continue seeing that we are a mystical, well-run organization.
Okay, so how can you explain that then? What does that mean to be? Explain the mystical part. What does that mean to be a mystical organization? Because mystery implies a lack of information or a lack of knowledge for those who are on the outside looking in, or on the outside perhaps wanting to come in. Says the skeptics. That's not. I'm kind of playing the devil's advocate.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, I would say a basis of our organization is and what we saw as our motive when we began is connected to spiritual transformation. Is that people can look at that part of their lives. They can get the other part of their lives together in a more practical way, but to begin to open spiritually to the universe. So that's how I would describe that. Do you have anything more to say about that, Catherine?
I certainly agree with what you said. I will add that we do mean it, which means that we have some practices and traditions that help us remember it. For example, when we have board meetings, and in the United States, a nonprofit is legally governed by a board. In other words, the day-to-day operations, Sita and I can just agree with each other and move on. But from a legal standpoint and an oversight standpoint, we have this board of directors. Yeah. So when the board of directors meets, we start every meeting, we do a brief meditation together, and then we say what we call an invocation, which is very short and simple. And it is, may we collectively intuit God's will for Human Kindness Foundation. That sets the tone and helps us remember that we're not just there to look at numbers. We have to be responsible. Sure. We're taking donors' money, and so of course we have to be responsible for how it gets spent and that it gets documented in all the legal ways, etc. We just don't want to get completely lost in that and Sure. forget that we're also a spiritual organization and that we're not coming into this just to, build up our salaries or build up an endowment that will last forever or whatever. We might work towards some of those goals, but only if it feels like God's will.
That's just a beautiful sentiment. And I think it comes shining through that the Human Kindness Foundation is there to help people build upon their spirituality so that they can change their lives for the better. How successful would you say the Human Kindness Foundation is at doing that?
Wow, that's a great question. That's, I believe that we are incredibly successful. And I will again refer back to something Bo used to say. There was one man that we knew well while he was incarcerated, and then when he was released, this is going back quite a few years, but when he was released, he came and stayed with us for a while. We don't have that capacity anymore, but at the time we had a place where we could let him come and live with us and work with us. His name was Michael. And Bo used to say, if Michael is the only one we ever touched, it was worth all of it. Because Michael mattered that much. And you could fill in a different name, of course. There are others that we could point to. But if one person who was in deep suffering and deep layers of unhealthiness, spiritually and emotionally, healed and transformed and became a person of service and kindness in the world, that would be enough. Now, luckily, Sita and I could name off way more people. We could spend this whole hour telling you about some of the wonderful people like Michael who did change their lives. But we also do believe that if we're following God's will, like we work to do, and we can point to even one, then we've done our job. Now, we also have other ways that we could say we're successful. For example, there might be a person who writes to us and gets our books and does not experience the drastic, absolute, total transformation of their lives that Michael did. But that day that they received that book, they knew somebody in the world cared about them. They knew that letter they sent had been answered.
So it's almost as if every little thing you do is a success to some degree.
Well, I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but we have plenty of examples, yes, and they can be that small success, like, oh, somebody cared, even if I never read this book, all the way up to total transformation.
Yeah.
And also, I want to.
There are some things we do that don't work so well.
I wanted to tell you about a conversation I had with Ramdas, and maybe it was about 10 years ago when he asked me a similar question about the success of Human Kindness Foundation, and I told him at the time, I think as a result of our project and our books and our work, that when people get out and also inside, it's not like they're going to necessarily continue on the spiritual path, go to church or meditate or any of those kind of things. Yeah. But I truly, truly believe in my deepest heart that a lot of the people we have touched are going to stop hurting people, which is a big thing considering so much of the suffering that, what their backgrounds look like.
From what I've seen in the type of work that I've done throughout my adult years, the people who learn to love themselves, they also will learn to love others. So they're lashing out, their hurting of others, their criminality disappears when they learn to love themselves, when they learn to find some value, some sort of value in their life. And that's why I said to you just a minute ago, Catherine, that it seems as if almost every little thing you do is successful, because the simple gesture of getting one of your books or your newsletter can tell an inmate that, wow, somebody thought of me, somebody cares. Yeah. And that can be life-changing for that inmate.
Yes. Yeah, one of our mentors said to us, don't forget, Sita, that most of what you're doing inside prisons is letting people know you care about them. Just as Catherine said. That's most of what this project's about.
I can only imagine how lost a lot of inmates feel, lost and hopeless. How do I put this? Our criminal justice system is quite effective. I mean, it puts people in jail and in prison, but there is an element of unfairness that is
huge.
Yes, that has been in place for far too long, and there is a reason for the importance for organizations such as yours. In the midst of all of that unfairness, all of that that injustice, the smallest gesture can be a transformative moment for that incarcerated person. Now, most of your inmates that you deal with men or women, or is it a good mix?
It's a mix. Certainly, there are more men incarcerated in the U.S. than there are women. Yeah. But we do get mail from both, and we don't seek people out. We respond to who writes to us. So sometimes people will ask. Yes, and of course the book has been circulating for so long, and we have other books too, but the one we've mentioned, We're All Doing Time, has been circulated for so long, and it always includes our address and says, if you'd like your own copy, write to this address. So we don't, when people say, well, will you work with women? We work with whoever writes to us. We respond in that way.
Interesting.
I wanted to go back, John, to
Sure.
You just said that part about touching people, just not letting them know we care. I am remembering a phone call I had with the sister of someone who was in prison. And, it was just a routine phone call. She's telling me about her brother and giving me his name and his address, and I'm just taking the information. We're going to send him the books. But, of course, we're chatting a little at the same time. And I had just taken his name. I had it right in front of me, so I said something about Anthony. I just, mentioned to her, said something about Anthony, her brother. She burst into tears. And when she got enough composure to speak again, she said, no one ever calls him by his name.
Oh,
wow.
No one ever talks to me about him and uses his name.
Mm.
So that was a simple yet powerful gesture.
Yes. And so I want to invite you to consider, and I'm absolutely not perfect at this. Language is a hard thing to change habits around. Yeah. Still, I'd like to invite you to think about, instead of using the word inmate, use people first language, which we're working on. And like I said, we are not perfect. We still have materials that go out that don't use that language. But I find it a useful exercise for myself to, instead of saying inmate or prisoner, to say a person who's incarcerated or a person on our mailing list or some other way of phrasing that. Because like you said, in this country, at least, I can't speak for other countries, but in the U.S., there is so much inequity. There are so many reasons people get incarcerated that have little or nothing to do with criminal behavior. Often, there is a final criminal act, but it's no worse. In fact, often it's way less severe than people who are not incarcerated who are doing. In other words, you might have $20 and become incarcerated in this country where someone else is stealing thousands of dollars and getting away with it. So I just like to remember in a very active way that these are people, these are Americans, these are citizens, and we have been so in the habit of demonizing them culturally.
Yes.
And believing that, well, if you're in prison, it's because you did something really bad. And that's just not true.
I can definitely get on board with changing my my vocabulary and referring to them as people who are incarcerated rather than calling them an inmate or a prisoner. Absolutely. I see the importance in that. I see how that can change. People are affected according to how they are addressed by society. Absolutely. So I can definitely get on board with that. I am also one who believes that there is way too much injustice in our so-called, and I say so-called, justice system. It needs to be fixed. It should have been fixed decades ago, and it's an open wound on America. It's an open wound on America, and but because of organizations like yours, it shines a light. It helps to shine a light on that problem.
Thank you.
Do you ladies get tired? Do you get frustrated? Do you get how do you keep your motivation up? How do you keep that drive? This foundation has been going for 47 years?
That's right.
So how do you keep fighting? How do you keep moving forward? How do you keep reaching out to the people who need you?
Well, I want to share with you a practice that Ram Dass gave us when we first began this project in '73. He said that our work would be maintaining a balance between the snow on top of the mountain, which is the perfection of everything in God's universe, just that it's perfect, and the blood at our feet, which is the suffering, the immense suffering in the world. So it's been probably my main practice all these years, is really trying to stay right in the middle. If I stay too much in the perfection, I'm too aloof. And if I suffer too much reading a letter or whatever, I'm not able to really help that person who was incarcerated who wrote to us for spiritual guidance. So my work is really trying to maintain that balance. And Catherine can vouch for me. I don't get burned out. I've been doing this for a really, really long time. And I feel immense joy in taking a stack of letters and reading them each day, just about every day, and responding to the people who have written to us. You know, there's so much hope in those letters, and I try to be in the universe of that person, you know, when I open and read that letter. So that's my response to your question.
So to keep the question simple, do you get tired? And to keep the answer simple, no, you don't get tired. The motivation is that
I never rest. I do. I do rest. I'll be 76 next month, and I do rest. But mostly it fills me with energy, John. I mean, it really does, to be able to be doing this. I can hardly believe how fortunate I am to be able to be opening this mail and being with these people.
So that fire was lit. That fire was lit back in '73, and it's still burning.
Amen. Amen, my friend.
You know, that's the first time I've heard. Now, people have written "Amen" on different posts on social media that I've been involved in, but that's the first "Amen" I've heard in months, probably. So, thank you for that.
I'm going to say Sita is absolutely telling the truth about herself. When she does go on vacation, when she gets back, she cannot wait, and I almost like try to not give her the whole stack of mail that has piled up while she's been gone, because she'll sit down and blow through the whole thing. And, you know, I want to encourage her to rest and to come back in a little more slowly. But she is that excited about reading those letters and answering that mail. And that's very genuine. I've been working with Sita. See, I've only been doing this work for 20 years. So, but in that 20 years, I have seen that Sita that is who she is. That is what she does. And she has a fresh energy for the mail every single day.
That is just such a wonderful thing to sit and think on, that someone could be doing this type of work for so long and touch so many lives. And I'm talking about both of you, you know, 20 years for you, Catherine, 47 years for you, Sita. It's just amazing and quite fortunate. It's a blessing to be able to do that kind of work for so long.
We do feel very fortunate.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Let me ask you this. Are there struggles to fund your foundation? Is that ever an issue?
It's something that we work on. I wouldn't say we struggle with it exactly. We have been incredibly fortunate as an organization to have some very loyal, long-time support. And we keep our expenses very low. You're looking at almost the entire staff of Human Kindness Foundation right now, Sita and I. And we have one other who has only been with us a little over a year. She's such a gift. She's our operations manager, and has sworn me to not call her out. So, but I have
Little
to anyway.
shy.
She's just amazing. She's so helpful and wonderful. And after 20 years of certain tasks having been done by me, it is just so exciting to see someone else doing them. So anyway, she's almost full-time, and Sita and I both, so that's really less than 3 full-time equivalent, serving 30,000 people. And we keep our other expenses quite low also. Postage and printing, we can't keep low. That's the main heart of our work, postage and printing. But everything else stays pretty low. And like I said, we have some very loyal support now. We are experiencing that an organization that's been going for more than 45 years, some of our donors are aging out.
Yeah.
They're either dying or they're, becoming incapacitated, or they're moving on in whatever way. So we do have to work on how do we reach new people.
And how do you go about
care enough to support.
And how do you go about that? How does that work manifest itself?
We don't really know yet, John.
Yeah.
So far we trust. We have a lot of trust, and it has worked out. And I was, before the pandemic hit, I was doing some local networking in the Durham, Chapel Hill area of North Carolina. I was reaching out to people here close by. Traditionally, our support has been spread out all over the country, just like our service is.
Yeah.
But of course, it's hard to do networking nationally. So I was doing some of that locally until everything shut down. And we do have support from some local churches and some other faith organizations. And we trust that people care and people will keep getting attracted to our work. And we also need to come up with some, more active strategies, but we haven't quite gotten there yet.
I think it would be a big challenge, but a challenge that would be worthy of your focus. Not that I'm trying to tell you what to do. Don't get me wrong here, but I think there is this whole thing that's going around in America where people have such a harsh way of thinking about people who are incarcerated. They did this wrong, they got caught, and now they're being punished. Forget them. And that's very mildly said. People say that a lot harsher.
Right.
Could it be something to look into when it comes to trying to change people's perception of people who are incarcerated? Shine a light on their situation, shine a light on their humanity. Is that an idea, and how could that be done in practical terms?
Are you familiar with Brian Stevenson?
No.
You need to know about him. He is wonderful. He is a lawyer in the U.S. He's based in Montgomery, Alabama, and in New York City. And he wrote the book called Just Mercy, which has recently been made into an amazing movie.
What was his name?
So
Brian Stevenson?
Brian Stevenson.
And the book was called?
He's Just Mercy.
Just Mercy, okay.
The book is excellent. The movie is excellent. So Brian talks about the way to change the world, and he has 4 important points, things that have to happen to change the world. And one of the 4 is change the narrative. And I believe that that's the one we most work on, change the narrative. When people encounter Human Kindness Foundation, people who are not incarcerated encounter Human Kindness Foundation, they begin to learn about the humanity of people that they might have formerly called criminals.
Yeah.
They begin to hear the stories. They begin to see the artwork on our website and on our social media. We share artwork from people behind bars. If they're open to it and begin to connect with Human Kindness Foundation, they at least have the opportunity to open their hearts to people who are behind bars. And to me, that is our work to help change the narrative. I mean, of course, our primary work is directed to the people behind bars that are getting our materials, and we hope really transforming their lives. But also important is that we're helping to change the narrative.
That's a pretty big task, though, because that callousness is pretty well embedded in the psyche of America, that callousness towards people who are incarcerated. So that's a big job to change that, to scrape away that callousness. Do you see the need to bring in some more people into the organization, to do that work? Do you have enough people? Do you have enough hands in the pot the way it is now?
Well, so far, we as an organization have chosen to stay small. We don't believe we have to change the narrative all by ourselves. There are lots of organizations doing great work. Brian Stevenson's organization, Equal Justice Initiative, they're doing large-scale work. I mean, they just had a mass-marketed Hollywood movie come out, this movie Just Mercy. So they're doing really big-picture, change-the-narrative work. Wow. They've also created a monument in Montgomery, Alabama, that is bringing thousands of people to Montgomery to commemorate the terrible history of lynching in this country.
Yes.
So his organization is having this very huge, large-scale impact. Ours is not. I mean, ours is having huge impact in individuals' lives.
I see.
Yes. But we're not reaching millions and millions of people every year. We're reaching tens of thousands of people every year. And so far, we have chosen that is our job. That's what God has called us to do. That could change. We have an infrastructure that could be added onto if we're led that direction, if the board decided that it wanted to put the energy that way. And I will say what we're already doing is we're supporting other organizations where we don't feel like we have to take on all of the work ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
But we do, when led, we combine with other organizations. For example, Human Kindness Foundation is a member of a coalition in our county, and that coalition is about racial justice and learning the history of racial injustice locally and nationally. And I've been very involved with that organization since its beginning about a year and a half ago. So in that sense, Human Kindness Foundation isn't taking on a whole new project, but we are helping that work get done in the county.
Well, there's the power of networking and the importance of networking. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
In the old days, when Bo would go on a prison tour, he would visit churches as well when invited, and give his talk. I mean, I'm sure he has helped many people regarding the narrative in that way. And, it might happen again that our board of directors and that we, as an organization, we talk about the possibility of sending somebody around for that purpose. I've been thinking about that, Catherine. This is the first time I'm telling you that.
Revealed for the first time on the Coming Home podcast. Well, no, that would be quite a step to take, to have that spokesperson who is out there, hitting the streets and spreading the word of what you all are doing.
And visiting churches is one way to do it. I mean, Jesus spoke about this.
Absolutely, yes, he did. Yes,
Jesus spoke about this, and it's such a lovely idea to welcome somebody getting out of prison to a specific congregation. Anyway, it's something I've been thinking about.
Let me ask you about that step once a person is no longer incarcerated, because a lot of the work that you all are doing is for those people while they're incarcerated. But what happens when they get out? What kind of follow-up can you offer for those people? Any follow-up or guidance?
Well, to us, the same guidance that works while you're inside prison works once you're out. We do lose touch with a lot of people, and frankly, that is sometimes just because they don't have a stable address. And most of what we do happens through the mail. But when they do keep us informed about their address and want to stay in touch, they can stay on our mailing list exactly as if they were still in prison. They can request our free books exactly as if they were still in prison. They can, now that they're out, they can have easier access to call or email us.
Okay.
So they can stay in touch that way if they want to. So we really don't feel like there's a giant difference.
Okay. So if someone calls you, what kind of things are they asking for? What kind of help do they need?
Well, they need everything. People coming out of prison, unless they happen to have very strong family support, they need everything. And especially if they've been inside for a very long time. For example, people who've been locked up for 20 years or more, they don't know how to use the internet. They don't know how to pump gas.
Think about it.
Think about it.
Yeah.
The things that change gradually for us, that this person is coming into not a gradual change, and they might not know how to buy groceries or pump gas or use a bank or any of the basics. So people need all kinds of help. What we offer as an organization, now, we'll usually try to connect.
I'm sorry, you faded out.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So when someone calls and they ask about those practical concerns, what we can do is try to connect them with another organization that works with that sort of thing. For example,
back to the networking. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Back to the networking. And they're not usually calling from our area, since we serve people all over the country.
All over the country. Yeah.
They might be calling us from the West Coast, so we can't really help them find a job or a place to live. But we hope, and we're always successful, but we hope we can connect them with a more hands-on service kind of organization where they are. But the main thing that we can offer is what you're getting right now. Just talk to Sita, and just have a little time with someone telling you that she loves you and she knows you can do this, and that kind of interaction, that kind of warm, loving interaction, and people can call us to get that.
And again, that is such a meaningful thing for some of these people who may have been incarcerated for decades, and they have forgotten that there are people who can care about them. And then just to hear those words from you. Let me ask you, Sita, are there any opportunities for people to come directly to you for mentoring?
Well, certainly not while a pandemic is going on.
Right.
We don't even have any volunteers in the office. It's just me in the office and our operations manager. But I would say, because of my age and the amount of work that we have, I definitely continue recommending that they find something local.
Yes.
That they actually come and, I certainly encourage people to see how they can help out in the world and to do it locally. So as Catherine said, I'm completely willing to have a conversation with them about anything, but it's usually in that direction.
I see. What I would love to see, this is wishful thinking, but I'm an optimist, so I believe this could happen. I would like to see that figure, that person, man or woman, rise up on a national level and have a call to action. A call to action where if you are able, if you have the stability in your own life, the strength and the knowledge in your own life, stand forward and offer some sort of mentoring for people who are not as fortunate. Wouldn't that be a great national movement if people could just give maybe one day a week for maybe 1 hour to sit, maybe not in person, but on a telephone with someone who needs advice on life, guidance of some sort.
Yeah. It's lovely.
Yes.
What the Human Kindness Foundation is doing is, to me, so inspiring. It needs to be bigger than what it is. And I could see people taking what the Human Kindness Foundation does and take it on an individual level. What can you do as an individual to help someone who is in need. And it doesn't have to be something that's measurable in dollars and cents. You don't have to give away money, but sometimes just giving away some advice, giving away some guidance on issues that people need help with.
Well, and John, to just speak up a little bit for some positive trends that happen in this country, I absolutely agree with you that our cultural narrative or our cultural sort of atmosphere has been very harsh.
We seem to be so callous. We seem to be so callous now.
Yes, but there is a very strong movement to reverse that. And there are a lot of people working on just what you were talking about. There's a pretty widespread movement called circles of support. And that's usually handled by a local organization. It's usually faith-based. But these circles of support will be 4 to 6 people who create a circle that includes one person coming straight out of incarceration. And they really act kind of just as friends. They, for example, a friend of mine is in one of those circles, and one of the things she has done with her partner who came out of prison is she took him to the library and showed him how to Google something. And, he was just fascinated. He had never Googled anything and didn't have any clue how to start doing that. So she, that simple thing, which was fun for her, really was a big help to him. So things like that, where it's truly a circle of friends. And what do you do with your friends? You help them when you can.
Sure. It's a series of small gestures over time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people can be pen pals if they want to, or they could join one of those circles if they have a local organization doing that. We do, although we don't manage it ourselves, we do hear from many people who teach inside their local prison or jail. And when I say teach, they could be teaching anything. Usually if they contact us, it's because they're teaching meditation.
Okay.
But we encourage them, whatever it is you love. If you love sewing or reading books or discussing politics or basket weaving, go in and share that with the people, because what you're really doing is sharing yourself.
Yeah.
And so we have, for example, a PDF guide on our website about how to get started if you want to volunteer in your local prison or jail. So in those ways, we are, again, background supportive. We're not managing it. We don't set up the times. We don't, we don't decide who gets to go in, who doesn't get to go in. Just give some materials, make those materials available so that if any individual wants to pursue that, they have a little bit of a place to start.
Yeah. Just put the information out there and trust the people to pick it up and run with it. Yeah. That's a great concept. Very, very easy to enforce that. You just put the information. well, it's
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a bigger organization, but for us, we have never felt led to do that.
Well, there's a lot of, I can see a lot of effectiveness in the simplicity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where we have landed. Again, it could change in the future, but right now and in our history, we have mostly decided to keep it pretty simple. We know how to do this, and we've been doing it for a long time, and so this is what we're doing.
Yeah. So I would imagine that you're still able to do the work almost unaffected by COVID. In that you're such a small organization, or are there challenges because of COVID?
Well, there are some practical challenges. Sita mentioned we're not having our volunteers come in right now, and we traditionally have leaned very heavily on volunteer help. In fact, I started, when I say I've been doing this for 20 years, I started as a full-time volunteer. For 6 years, I was a volunteer. So we have traditionally used a lot of volunteer help, and right now we're not having any volunteer help in person. Now, some people are still writing to people and so on, and picking things up from our office.
I guess that's mostly what I was thinking of, is that thing about having the correspondence between the people who are incarcerated and your organization. That can be done from home, is what I was thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, for example, Sita and our operations manager are working harder right now because they have to do all the packaging themselves, because that can't really be done from home. We have this giant warehouse full of books. You have to be there to package those books to send out to individuals. So Sita and Kristen are working really hard right now. I'm working remotely.
Okay.
And we have figured out how to have a little bit of volunteer help without endangering anyone. But that's all a minor, in some ways, practical challenge. But overall, you're right. Our work has not been interrupted at all.
Okay, good. Well, No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I live on the property of Human Kindness Foundation.
Oh, do you? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I do. Bo built us a little home, and I rent it from Human Kindness Foundation. And so it's easy for me to just walk over this tiny little bridge over to the office. And that's the way it continues.
Oh, that's fantastic. I also love being able to work from home. It's a position of luxury, I'm here to tell you. I love it. I love it. I have to tell you, I have really enjoyed having this talk. I think your foundation is doing some very important work. It's fascinating. And I thank you all for letting me shine a light on what you do. I thank you both from my heart for being guests on my podcast.
Thanks for inviting us, John.
Yeah, we appreciate you spreading the word. And of course, we hope that people who hear you will go to our website, maybe sign on for our newsletter. And we do need support. So, of course, we'd appreciate it if people feel moved to donate. However, the most important thing is, like we said, changing the narrative in their own hearts. We hope people will consider where they're still holding on to that intolerance for people who are locked up for all kinds of reasons that they're locked up.
Let's just try and wear down that callousness with love. Put some love on that callousness and wear it down. Yep.
Amen again.
That's 2 amens. I love it. Thank you. Real quick, let me put your website out there. It is humankindnessfoundation.org. Am I correct?
No, it's just humankindness.org.
Humankindness.org. Humankindness.org. Everybody who's listening, please go in on humankindness.org. Look at what these fantastic ladies and their cohorts are doing. It's beautiful work. It's important work. Check it out, people. Thanks again, ladies. Thank you so much for being my guests.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you all for listening. Bye, everybody.
I'm coming home. Coming home. Yes, I am. Yes, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I